Hello and welcome to another TLC tutoring accounting lesson. Today we're going over dividend allocation, which personally I find this topic to be a lot of fun because, I don't know, we're kind of able to equate it to something we may have experienced in our lives if we've had siblings. Let's take a look at the problem and then we'll jump into what we're really trying to do here. We have XYZ Corporation that has 50,000 shares of 2% $40 par preferred stock and 200,000 shares of $5 par common stock. So you'll notice that we have two classes of stock here to start off with. Now during 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, XYZ Corporation distributed the following amounts in cash dividends. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at those numbers later. Now what the problem wants us to do is for each year determine how much of the above amounts were allocated to preferred shareholders and common shareholders and calculate the dividend per share for each class of stock. So essentially what we need to accomplish here is take a look at those amounts for each year, that 15,000, 45,000, 70,000, 100,000, and find out how much of that went to preferred and how much of that went to common. Now, from what you've probably already read in your textbook for preferred stock is that they get dividends first. So whatever dividends are being paid out, their dividends are covered first. So the first thing we need to figure out before we kind of jump right into things is how much preferred shareholders are entitled to, and I'm kind of using air quotes there in my office right now, how much they're entitled to each year. So when we say entitled to, we're going to see how much that they should be getting, those 50,000 shares. So in order to do that, we need to use a bit of a formula, and I encourage you to remember this formula going forward. So preferred dividends is going to equal percentage times par times shares. So percentage times par times shares, always. In this case, for preferred shareholders, they have 2% times a $40 par, and they have 50,000 preferred shares. So when we plug that into everything, we see that we have 2% times 40 times 50,000 shares. Preferred shareholders are entitled to $40,000 every year. Now, just because this is so important, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this so we remember to go back to it regularly during today's video. All right, so that 40,000 is going to be extremely important as we work through this problem, and you'll see why in a moment. Now that we know that 40,000 is what preferred shareholders are entitled to every year, we have to know one other thing. We have to know if this preferred stock is cumulative or not cumulative. So if you're working on one of these problems right now, I want you to take a close look at your problem to see whether it says cumulative or not cumulative. Because in this problem, we are going to assume that those preferred shares are cumulative. Now, cumulative means that if those preferred shareholders don't get their $40,000 one year, then whatever is still owed to them will be made up at a later date. So let's see how this would work with our first year. So for our first year, 2018, we see that they are giving out a total dividend of $15,000. So with that $15,000, we must determine how much of that is going to be going to preferred shareholders and how much will be going to common. Now let's take a look at our preferred dividend calculation from before. How much were preferred shareholders entitled to? They were entitled to $40,000. Now, one cool way that we can think of this is almost like an allowance for two siblings. So we have the preferred sibling and we have the common sibling. Now, the preferred sibling is entitled to a $40,000 allowance every year. So in this case, no matter what, the preferred sibling is supposed to get $40,000. Now, obviously, if they don't get that $40,000 next year, then it should be made up. Now, the common sibling is going to get whatever is left over. So I want you to kind of keep that concept in mind as we go over this Now, $15,000 was the total dividend for 2018. Preferred shareholders want $40,000. However, are they going to get the full $40,000? Unfortunately not, because XYZ Corporation did not have enough money to pay them. So how much of this $15,000 dividend are preferred shareholders going to receive? $15,000. They receive the full amount. I'm sure they would love to receive more, but unfortunately they cannot receive the full $40,000 because they don't have that money right now. Now, we're going to come back to that for preferred per share at the end. Right now, let's focus on totals for preferred and common. So if $15,000 of that total dividend went to preferred shareholders, how much is left over for common? Unfortunately, zero. So our common shareholders are not going to be receiving any of that $15,000 this first year. They do not get a dividend. Now, let's talk about how this cumulative is going to come into play. Now, whenever it says that it is cumulative preferred stock, then whatever is owed, in this case, they wanted $40,000. They only got $15,000. So therefore, they are essentially kind of owed $25,000. That $25,000 is going to go into something we call arrears. Let's go ahead and set up a column for that off to the side since we're dealing with cumulative. Now, this preferred arrears is going to be so important during this period. I'm going to go ahead and put that in red so we remember to go back to it. So in this case, preferred shareholders wanted $40,000. They only received $15,000. So how much of that $40,000 did they not get? They did not get $25,000 of it. Now, we're going to be using that $25,000 next year when we're finding out the new amount that preferred shareholders should get. So for now, let me just quickly format that so it's nice and neat. All right. Now, again, we'll come to per share at the very end. Let's run through these totals first. All right, taking a look at 2019, the total dividend that XYZ Corporation gave out was $45,000. Now, let's work on preferred. So, $45,000 is the amount that XYZ Corporation, essentially the parent, has to give out. So, preferred shareholders, the preferred sibling, how much do they stick their hand out and ask for? They are going to be asking for $40,000, which they are entitled to for this year, plus the arrears from last year. So, this year they're saying, I don't just want $40,000. I want that additional $25,000 that you promised me from last year. So that, remember, that is because it is cumulative. If it was not cumulative, that $25,000 would be gone forever. But since it is cumulative, they hold out their hand and they say, I would like $65,000. Now let's ask ourselves, do they have $40,000 plus $25,000? Do they have $65,000 to give out? No, unfortunately, they do not. They only have $45,000. So how much of that $45,000 are the preferred shareholders going to receive? Just the $45,000. So how much is in arrears then for these preferred shareholders now? They wanted $40,000 for this current year, plus they wanted the $25,000 they were owed for 2018. So they wanted $65,000. They only received $45,000. So there's $20,000 in arrears. Now, if this concept is confusing to you, please make sure to pause it and go back until you understand exactly where that $20,000 is coming from. At the beginning of 2019 or during 2019, they wanted $40,000, which they were entitled to for 2019, but they also wanted the $25,000 they were owed from 2018. So they asked for $65,000. Of that $65,000, the parent corporation could only pay $45,000. That means that additional $20,000 that was not paid goes into that year's arrears. And then hopefully next year they'll get paid that $20,000. So now that that hopefully makes sense, please make sure to keep thinking about it until it does. Let's move on to common for 2019. So they had $45,000 in dividends, $45,000 went to preferred shareholders. So how much is common getting? Unfortunately, again, there is nothing left over for common shareholders. So we're seeing the same issue again. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at 2020 and see if this can turn things around. So in 2020, XYZ Corporation says I have $70,000 to give out. So let's take a look at preferred. Preferred reaches out their hand and says, I would like how much? They would like $40,000 plus the $20,000 from last year. They want $60,000. Now, does the parent corporation, does XYZ Corporation have enough money to give out $60,000? Absolutely. So how much is preferred going to get? The $60,000 they asked for. They are not going to get any more than that. They asked for $60,000. They had enough to be given that $60,000. They received their $60,000. So what's in arrears? Nothing. Because they got paid the total amount that they were owed. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at common. So the total dividend was $70,000. $60,000 went to preferred. So how much is left over for common? $10,000. Now we see that common shareholders are starting to get paid. All right, one more year, 2021. The total dividend for this year is a whopping $100,000. So preferred shareholders, they go to the corporation, they say, we want how much? Just $40,000. That is because they are no longer owed anything from prior years. So they are going to get that $40,000. Now, since preferred is getting $40,000, how much is left over for common? Just $60,000. All right, now that we have our totals, let's do that last part. They want us to calculate the dividend per share. So let's start with preferred. Whenever we say dividend per share, we're using the formula dividends divided by number of shares. So for 2018, preferred shareholders got a $15,000 dividend. And how many shares did preferred shareholders have? They had a total of 50,000 shares. So essentially, each share of preferred stock received, let's go ahead and get some decimals there. There we go. They received 30 cents per share. Now let's try the same thing with 2019. In 2019, preferred shareholders received total dividends of 45,000 and their total shares still 50,000. So you notice that dividends divided by shares is working perfectly for each of these dividends per share. Let's do 2020. 60,000 in dividends, 50,000 shares, $1.20 per share. And for 2021, 40,000 in dividends divided by still 50,000 shares preferred, 80 cents. All right, let's do the same thing for common. For 2018, dividends per share, they had 0 in dividends, and they had 200,000 common shares. So make sure that you're not accidentally bringing over those preferred shares from the last one. There's usually a different number of preferred shares and common shares. In this case, common shares has 200,000. All right, so we're seeing it's 0 for the first year, but we could have expected that. Again, I'm just doing this so we're getting comfortable with that dividends per share formula. Dividends of 0 divided by 200,000 common shares, 0 again. Let's try 2020. 10,000 in dividends for common, 200,000 shares. So they're getting 5 cents per share. Let's do this last one. 60,000 in dividends divided by 200,000 shares, 30 cents per share. So essentially, those are going to be your important answers. Pay close attention to whether your problem is asking for totals or if they're asking for per share amounts, because that's going to change what you are inputting into the system. So please make sure that you are practicing this dividend allocation very thoroughly. It might seem hard at first, but once you start doing a little bit, it actually gets pretty fun. So you know what to do. I'll be making more videos, and in the meantime, happy studying.